The vase exploded against the wall 6 inches from the elderly woman's head. Porcelain fragments scattered like shrapnel across marble floors. The entire restaurant held its breath. Silverware frozen. Conversations strangled mid-sentence. Everyone at LSA knew what happened to people who crossed Curtis Ji-sung Choi. Everyone except the black waitress, now standing between the most feared man in Chicago and his trembling target, armed with nothing but a serving tray and 3 words that would detonate her entire life. "Man, don't you dare." 30 seconds earlier, Kimberly had been drowning in the worst cover assignment of her 8-year FBI career, 2 months embedded as a waitress at LSA. Chicago's playground for the wealthy, the corrupt, and the untouchable. 2 months of fake smiles, aching feet, and the suffocating weight of a wire pressed against her ribs beneath a starched white blouse. 2 months watching Curtis Ji-sung Choi conduct business from Table 7 like he owned not just the restaurant but the entire block. Which, according to her files, he probably did. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Serve, listen, record, get evidence of the human trafficking operation her handler, Agent Raymond Clark, swore Curtis was running. Simple. Nothing about tonight was simple. She'd been refilling wine glasses when she heard the crash. A salt cellar hitting the floor with percussive violence. Then another. A plate. The elderly Korean woman at Curtis's table flinched with each impact, her hands shaking, her voice a desperate stream of Korean that Kimberly didn't need to translate to understand. The woman was pleading. Curtis Ji-sung Choi rose from his seat like a storm taking shape. At 34, he was the kind of dangerous that didn't announce itself with volume. 6'2" of controlled menace wrapped in a black Brioni suit that cost more than Kimberly made in 6 months. His dark eyes missed nothing. The serpent tattoo coiling up his neck seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. His reputation preceded him like a shadow. Reaper Curtis, they called him in the underground. The man who dismantled rival operations with surgical precision, the ghost souls organized crime families whispered about in hushed Korean. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't need to. The crystal sculpture. A dove, ironically, sailed past the woman's head and shattered against the vintage wallpaper, in an explosion that sounded like breaking bones. Wine dark red against cream. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The woman's sob cut through the silence like a blade. And something in Kimberly snapped. Not the FBI training. Not the mission parameters. Not the carefully constructed cover story that had taken 3 months to build. Something deeper. Something that remembered being 14 in a foster home, watching a grown man terrorize someone weaker, and promising herself, asterisk, never again. Never silent. Never complicit. Asterisk. She moved before the rational part of her brain could stop her. Man, don't you dare. The words came out steady. Louder than she intended. Carrying across the marble floors and beneath the crystal chandeliers until they reached every corner of the restaurant. Curtis turned slowly, very slowly. When his gaze landed on her, Kimberly felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. His eyes were obsidian. Black, depthless, calculating. They moved over her like he was reading a book written in a language only he understood. Taking in her stance, her clenched jaw, the way she'd positioned herself between him and the elderly woman without thinking. His 3 bodyguards moved forward. Hands disappeared inside tailored jackets. The unmistakable click of safeties being released whispered through the tension. Curtis raised one hand, stopped them cold. "Do you know," he said, his voice soft as silk over steel, "who I am?" Kimberly's heart hammered against her ribs, against the wire, against every piece of FBI protocol she was currently incinerating. "I know exactly who you are, Curtis Choi." She held his gaze, refused to let it drop. "And I know whatever she did, whatever she said, terrorizing someone who could be your grandmother. That doesn't make you powerful. It makes you a coward." The silence that followed was absolute. Someone in the kitchen whispered what sounded like a prayer in Spanish. At the bar, the manager pressed himself against the wall like he wanted to dissolve into it. Even Curtis's bodyguards looked uncertain, hands still on their weapons, eyes darting between their boss and this waitress who'd apparently chosen suicide by honesty. Curtis studied her for what felt like an eternity. Then something shifted in his expression. A flicker of surprise, perhaps recognition. something that looked almost like respect trying to break through granite. He spoke in rapid Korean to his men. They holstered their weapons, clearly confused. Then Curtis's eyes returned to Kimberly, and despite everything, the danger, the fear, the knowledge that she'd just destroyed months of undercover work, she didn't look away. "Take her to the back," Curtis said quietly. "Make sure she's okay." He meant the elderly woman. But his gaze stayed locked on Kimberly. "Then," he continued, "you and I need to talk." Kimberly helped the woman toward the kitchen, feeling the weight of every eye in the restaurant. But it was the elderly woman's expression that would haunt her. Not gratitude, not relief, terror. Raw, bone-deep terror. And it wasn't directed at Curtis. It was directed at Kimberly herself. The woman's fingers dug into Kimberly's arm as they reached the kitchen door. She leaned close, her voice a urgent whisper in heavily accented English. "You don't know what you've done. You don't know who you're saving." Then she was gone, shuffled out the back exit by one of Curtis's men who handled her with surprising gentleness. Kimberly stood alone in the kitchen's fluorescent glare, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was crashing. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A text from Clark. Asterisk. "What the hell are you doing?" "Abort. Now. Asterisk. Too late for that." She looked through the kitchen window at table 7, where Curtis sat with his back to her, speaking into his phone. Even from here, even through glass and distance, she could feel the weight of his attention. This was it. The moment that would define everything that came after. She walked back into the dining room. Curtis watched her approach. When she stopped at his table, he gestured to the chair across from him. Not a request. She, Saturday. Agent Phillips. He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "Or should I call you Kimberly?" The world tilted. Her cover was blown. He knew. Had known, maybe from the beginning. And she'd just walked right back into his orbit like a moth to a flame that had already burned through every safety net she had. Curtis smiled then. Not friendly. Not even close. It was the smile of a predator who'd just found something unexpectedly interesting. Something worth playing with before deciding what to do with it. "You're right about one thing," he said, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. "I am better than this, and you're about to find out exactly how much better." He stood, adjusted his cufflinks. "Platinum," she noticed distantly, engraved with Korean characters. "You have a choice to make, Agent Phillips. You can walk out that door, go back to your handler, and tell him this operation is dead. Or," he paused, something dangerous glinting in those dark eyes, "you can stay, and learn the truth about what you've actually been investigating." "What truth?" "The truth about who's really running the trafficking operation in this city." Curtis leaned forward, close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar and smoke. "And I'll give you a hint. You've been reporting to him for the past 6 months." The words hit like a physical blow. "Clark, that's impossible," Kimberly whispered. "Is it?" Curtis straightened. "Then why did your partner, Agent Martinez, disappear 3 weeks ago? Why did the last 2 raids your team conducted come up empty? Why does every piece of evidence against me somehow vanish before it reaches trial?" He moved toward the exit, his bodyguards falling into formation around him. At the door, he turned back. "You have 24 hours to decide, Kimberly. Walk away, or help me take down the man who's been using you to eliminate his competition while he sells innocents into slavery." "Why would you tell me this?" Her voice sounded hollow in her own ears. "Why trust me?" Curtis's expression softened. Just for a moment, just enough to let her see the human beneath the monster's mask. "Because 3 minutes ago, you put yourself between me and someone you thought was defenseless. You risked everything for a stranger." He held her gaze. "That tells me more about your character than 8 years of FBI service ever could." Then he was gone. Kimberly sat alone at table 7, surrounded by the wreckage of shattered porcelain and broken certainties, with a choice that would change everything. 24 hours. She pulled out her phone. Clark had sent 15 messages, each more frantic than the last. Her finger hovered over the call button. Then she thought about the elderly woman's terror. About Agent Martinez, who'd had a wife and 2 kids. About the files she'd seen. The ones that never quite made sense. The evidence that disappeared. The raids that felt staged. About Curtis's eyes when he'd said, "You're better than this." She powered off her phone. 24 hours. She was going to need every second. Hey, beautiful souls. Before we dive deep into this absolutely wild story, I need to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And listen, if this story hooks you the way I think it will, hit that subscribe button because what happens next? It's going to leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty, justice, and what happens when the monster you're hunting turns out to be your only ally. Now, let's get into it. 3 blocks away, in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Curtis Ji Sung Choi stood at floor-to-ceiling windows and made a call that would set everything in motion. David, we have a problem, and possibly, if I'm reading this right, our first real solution in 3 years. The game had changed tonight. And Kimberly Phillips, fearless, furious, and completely unaware of the war she'd just joined, was about to discover that monsters weren't always what they seemed. Sometimes they were the only ones fighting for angels. The safe house smelled like disappointment and stale coffee. Kimberly sat in the metal chair, the fluorescent light above her head buzzing like angry wasps, while Agent Raymond Clark paced the length of the cramped room. Each footfall was a punctuation mark in the lecture she'd been enduring for the past 20 minutes. 8 months. Clark stopped, his shadow falling across her like a judgment. 8 months of meticulous groundwork. 8 months of building a case against the most dangerous trafficking operation in the Midwest. And you destroyed it all in 30 seconds because of what? A misplaced sense of chivalry? Kimberly kept her eyes on the scarred table between them. She could still feel the weight of Curtis's gaze, still hear the elderly woman's whispered warning. She was being terrorized. She was bait. Clark slammed his hand on the table, making her flinch. The whole thing was theater, Phillips. Choi stages these displays to flush out surveillance, to see who breaks character. And congratulations, you gave him exactly what he wanted. Something cold slithered down her spine. You knew it was theater? I suspected. Clark resumed pacing, his tone shifting from anger to something colder, more calculated. But we needed you to maintain cover long enough to get the real evidence. Now? You're burned. He knows who you are, what you are. The operation is dead. Then let me go back in. The words came out desperate, raw. I can salvage this. I can. You can go home. Clark's voice was flat, final. Effective immediately. You're off the case. We'll debrief tomorrow, file the paperwork, and reassign you to something more suited to your emotional temperament. Evidence analysis, maybe. Somewhere you can't compromise operations with your feelings. The dismissal stung worse than the lecture. Kimberly stood, her legs unsteady. Martinez. Where's Martinez? He was my partner on this. He should be here for the debrief. Clark's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Just for a second, just long enough for her to catch it. Martinez is on another assignment, above your clearance. Liar. The thought came unbidden, sharp as a blade. She'd been trained to read tells, to catch the micro-expressions that betrayed deception. Clark was good, better than most, but she'd seen that flicker. Whatever happened to Martinez, it wasn't another assignment. Go home, Phillips, we'll be in touch. She left without another word, feeling his eyes on her back until the door closed behind her. Across the city, Curtis stood in his penthouse overlooking the lake's dark expanse, watching the security footage for the 3rd time. The restaurant's cameras had captured everything from 4 angles, and he studied each frame with the patience of a man who'd built an empire on details others missed. David Hahn leaned against the wall behind him, arms crossed, his former National Intelligence Service training evident in the way he cataloged every element of the scene. At 42, David was all sharp edges and sharper instincts, his face a mask that rarely betrayed emotion. Run it back, Curtis said. When she first moves, David tapped the tablet, and the footage rewound. They watched Kimberly stand, watched her body language shift from careful neutrality to righteous fury in the span of a heartbeat. No hesitation, no calculation, just pure, unfiltered courage. She didn't think, David observed. No tactical assessment, no consideration of consequences. She just acted. Exactly. Curtis's voice carried something like admiration. Everyone in my world moves with an agenda. Every action is calculated. But her? He gestured to the frozen frame of Kimberly standing between him and his aunt, her jaw set, her eyes blazing. That was instinct, moral instinct, dangerous instinct for an undercover agent, or exactly the kind of person we need. Curtis turned from the windows, his mind already 3 moves ahead. Clark sent her, we know that. What we don't know is how much she knows, how much she suspects, or whether she's dirty like her handler. David pulled up another file on his tablet. Kimberly Phillips, 29, former military intelligence, joined FBI 6 years ago. Spotless record, no red flags, no suspicious deposits, no lifestyle beyond her means. Lives in a studio apartment in Pilsen, drives a 15-year-old Honda, sends money to foster care organizations every month. He paused. She's got a sister in the files, Jasmine Phillips, went missing 3 years ago. Case went cold after 6 months. Curtis felt something tighten in his chest. A missing sister. He knew that particular brand of desperation, that consuming need to find someone the world had forgotten. Clark knows about the sister? Would be in her personnel file. Then he's using it. Curtis moved to the bar, poured 2 glasses of whiskey he wouldn't drink. His mind was already assembling the pieces. She's not dirty. Clark wouldn't risk putting a clean agent this deep unless he needed someone who'd be above suspicion when things inevitably went wrong. She's his insurance policy. And now that policy is compromised. David accepted the glass Curtis offered. What do you want to do about her? Curtis thought about those fierce eyes, that unwavering voice. Man, don't you dare. We give her a choice. But first, we make sure she understands what she's actually been investigating. He pulled out his phone, typed a quick message to his courier. By morning, Kimberly Phillips would have information that would shatter every certainty she had left. The question was whether that would drive her toward them, or deeper into Clark's web. Kimberly's apartment was exactly as depressing as she'd left it that morning. Studio was a generous term for 400 square feet of peeling paint and perpetual radiator noise. The Murphy bed was still down because folding it up required energy she hadn't possessed in weeks. Dishes were piled in the sink, the rent notice on the door. 3rd one this month. Fluttered when she pushed inside. She locked the door, engaged the chain, and slid down to sit on the floor with her back against it. Her phone was still off. Clark would be furious. But she couldn't deal with more of his cold disappointment tonight. Couldn't face the reality that her career was probably over. That 8 months of dangerous, exhausting undercover work had imploded because she couldn't stand by and watch an old woman be terrorized. Except it wasn't terrorism. It was theater. She pulled out Jasmine's file from under her mattress. The unofficial one. The one she'd compiled herself after the FBI's investigation stalled. Photos, witness statements, surveillance footage from the club where her sister was last seen. 3 years of dead ends and false leads, and the suffocating certainty that Jasmine was still out there somewhere, waiting for someone to find her. Clark had promised her resources. Had dangled the possibility of bureau assistance if she proved herself on the Choi case. Now that carrot was gone, and she was back to searching alone with no badge, no authority, no hope. The tears came hot and furious. She let them because there was no one here to see, no one to judge her for the weakness. When she finally stood, exhausted and hollow, she saw it. The envelope. Plain manila, unmarked, slipped under her door sometime while she'd been sitting there drowning in her own failure. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. Inside was a single photograph, the restaurant's private dining room, taken from an angle that should have been impossible, and written across the bottom in precise, masculine handwriting, "You're more useful alive. See." Kimberly stared at it for a long time, her mind racing through implications and threats and something that felt dangerously close to possibility. Curtis Choi knew where she lived, knew her name, knew she was FBI. And instead of eliminating the threat, he was making contact. Why? She thought about his words in the restaurant. The man who's been using you to eliminate his competition, thought about Martinez disappearing, about Clark's too quick dismissal of her questions, about 3 years of searching for Jasmine with resources that always seemed to dry up at crucial moments. Her phone buzzed on the floor where she dropped it. Still off, but the vibration meant someone was trying to reach her. Probably Clark, demanding her presence for more lectures about emotional compromise. Kimberly looked at the photograph again. At the message that was equal parts threat and invitation. 24 hours, Curtis had said. She had 24 hours to decide. She picked up her phone and powered it on. 17 missed calls from Clark, 3 from her supervisor. 1 text from a number she didn't recognize. Riverside Club, midnight. Come alone or don't come at all. She checked the time. 11:45. Kimberly grabbed her jacket and walked out into the night, toward a choice that would either save her or destroy everything she had left. Either way, she was done playing by rules written by men who'd never told her the truth. The Riverside Club existed in that liminal space between legitimate and criminal, where politicians rubbed shoulders with power brokers who'd never appear on any public ledger. Kimberly had researched it during her surveillance of Curtis. A restored warehouse on the Chicago River, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, Korean fusion cuisine that cost more per plate than she made in a week. Rain fell in sheets as she approached, turning the cobblestones slick and treacherous. Neon signs reflected in puddles like watercolor paintings, red and gold bleeding into each other. The scent of rain mixed with something else. Ginger, sesame oil, the char of meat on high heat. Jazz drifted from the club's entrance, saxophone notes curling into the night like smoke. The doorman was built like a wall and dressed better than most executives. He looked at her rain-soaked jacket and jeans with the kind of disdain reserved for trespassers, then checked something on his phone and stepped aside without a word. Inside, the club was all dark wood and darker shadows. Lacquered tables gleamed under ambient lighting. The bar stretched along one wall, backlit bottles glowing like jewels. The clientele was equally divided between sharp-suited Asian businessmen and Chicago's elite, all speaking in hushed tones that suggested every conversation was a negotiation. David Hahn materialized from the shadows like a ghost. Up close, he was more intimidating than the security footage suggested. Coiled violence wrapped in expensive tailoring. His eyes were the flat gray of winter skies, assessing her with professional thoroughness. "He's upstairs," David said, his English accented but precise. "This way." He led her past the main floor to a private elevator lined with mirrors. Kimberly caught her reflection. Wet hair, no makeup, exhaustion written in the circles under her eyes. She looked like exactly what she was, desperate. The elevator climbed in silence. David didn't speak, didn't check his phone, just watched the numbers tick upward with the patience of someone comfortable with silence. The doors opened onto a private space that was nothing like the club below. Here, Seoul met Chicago in perfect fusion. Traditional Korean architectural elements rendered in contemporary materials. Wooden beams supported a ceiling of translucent panels that let in diffused light. The walls were a study in contrast. Rough concrete on one side, smooth hanji paper on the other. A low table sat at the room's center, surrounded by floor cushions. Rain drummed against the windows overlooking the river, the sound hypnotic and close. Curtis stood at those windows, hands in his pockets, silhouette sharp against the city lights. He'd changed from the suit into something more casual. Black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark slacks, no tie. The serpent tattoo on his neck seemed alive in the ambient light, coiling and uncoiling with each breath. Kimberly. He turned, and the use of her first name felt intimate, dangerous. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either." She stayed near the elevator, escape route mapped in her mind. "But here I am, so talk." David moved to stand by the door, present but separate. Curtis gestured to the low table where 2 cups of tea steamed in ceramic bowls painted with delicate cranes. "Sit, please." It wasn't a request, not really, but it lacked the command she'd expected. Kimberly moved to the table, lowering herself onto one of the cushions with the kind of wariness that came from walking into a predator's den. Curtis sat across from her, the table a barrier and a bridge between them. "You met my aunt tonight," he said, sliding one of the teacups toward her. "Her name is Park Seo-jin. She raised me after my parents died. She's the closest thing to family I have left." Kimberly wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her cold fingers. "You have a strange way of treating family." The display was necessary. Curtis's jaw tightened, a flash of something raw crossing his features. "There are people who would use her to get to me. People who would torture information out of her that she doesn't even have. So I make them believe she's nothing to me, that she's a liability I barely tolerate, It keeps her safe. Theater, Kimberly said, remembering Clark's words. Everything is theater in my world. Curtis picked up his own cup but didn't drink. Every gesture, every word, every public moment is calculated for an audience. The only question is which audience and what message you want them to receive. And what message were you sending tonight? That I'm unstable, unpredictable, not worth the risk of crossing. His eyes found hers across the table. But you weren't part of that audience. You weren't supposed to react at all, yet you did. I saw someone being hurt. I reacted. Yes, something like admiration flickered in his expression. Without hesitation, without considering the consequences. That kind of instinct is rare in my world, Kimberly. People who move without calculation usually don't survive long enough to matter. She set down the tea untouched. Why am I here, Curtis? What do you want? He leaned back, studying her with that unsettling intensity. Agent Raymond Clark has been running a human trafficking operation out of Chicago for 6 years. He uses his position at the FBI to eliminate competition, to identify and neutralize anyone who gets close to exposing him. 3 months ago, my organization started dismantling his network, freeing the people he trafficked, destroying his distribution channels, turning his assets into liabilities. The words landed like physical blows. That's insane. Clark is. The reason your sister disappeared. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Kimberly's vision narrowed to Curtis's face, searching for the lie, for the manipulation she knew had to be there. But his expression was steady, certain, carved from the same stone as his words. Jasmine was taken from the club on West Division 3 years ago, Curtis continued, his voice gentler now. Clark's people grabbed her specifically because she was FBI adjacent. Your sister? Someone who could be used as leverage or insurance if you ever got too close to something you shouldn't see. He's been keeping her as a controlled asset, not in the system, not findable through normal channels. Kimberly couldn't breathe. The room tilted, reformed, tilted again. You're lying. I'm giving you the truth your handler has buried for 3 years. Curtis pulled out a tablet, slid it across the table. On the screen was a photograph. Recent, detailed, unmistakable. Jasmine. Older, harder, but alive. This was taken 2 weeks ago at one of Clark's facilities. I can give you the location. I can give you proof. But first, you need to decide if you're ready to know how deep the corruption goes. Kimberly grabbed the tablet with shaking hands, zooming in on her sister's face. Jasmine's eyes were different, haunted, empty in a way that spoke of trauma Kimberly couldn't begin to imagine. But she was alive. After 3 years of searching, of hoping, of slowly accepting that her sister was probably dead, she was alive. What do you want from me? The words came out broken. I need someone who can move through FBI channels without raising suspicion. Someone who can access files, monitor communications, identify who else might be compromised. Curtis leaned forward, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Clark sent you to investigate me because I'm getting too close to exposing him. He planned to either arrest me on fabricated charges or have me killed resisting arrest. You were meant to be his witness, his clean agent who could testify to my crimes. And now I'm supposed to betray everything I believe in and work for a criminal instead? No. The word was soft but absolute. Now you're supposed to decide whether you want to save your sister and stop a man who's been trafficking innocents under the protection of a badge, or whether you want to maintain your loyalty to an institution that's been using you as a weapon against the people trying to stop him. Kimberly looked at Jasmine's photo again, at the emptiness in eyes that used to be full of light. How do I know this is real? How do I know you're not just trying to turn me? Curtis reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin. Because if I wanted to turn you, I would have done it with threats, with leverage, with the 100 different pieces of information I have about your life, your vulnerabilities, your fears. His voice dropped lower, intimate as confession. Instead, I'm giving you a choice. Walk away right now. Go back to Clark. Pretend this conversation never happened. I'll make sure the photograph disappears. You can keep your career, your clearance, your clean conscience. Or you help me take him down. And I help you get your sister back. Their eyes locked across the table. And Kimberly felt the moment expand, felt the weight of every choice that had led her here pressing down like atmosphere. This man, this criminal, this monster that Clark had painted in her briefings, was offering her the thing she'd wanted most for 3 years. But at what cost? "I need proof," she said finally. "More than a photograph, more than accusations. If I'm going to betray my badge, I need to know for certain that Clark is dirty." Curtis smiled, slow and dangerous. "I can give you proof. But once you see it, once you know, there's no going back to not knowing. The comfortable lies you've been living with will be gone forever. I stopped being comfortable the day my sister disappeared. Then we have a deal." Curtis stood, moving around the table with predatory grace. He stopped beside her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. From his pocket, he pulled a phone. Sleek, encrypted, nothing like FBI issue. "This is clean, untraceable. My number is programmed in. Use it only for our communications." Kimberly took the phone, and their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, electric, entirely too charged for such a simple gesture. Curtis's pupils dilated slightly, and she watched his throat work as he swallowed. "There's one condition," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Name it. Full truth. No theater, no manipulation, no calculated messages for invisible audiences. If I'm going to trust you with my career and my life, you owe me honesty." Something shifted in Curtis's expression. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was warm, strong, calloused in ways that suggested his power wasn't just inherited wealth and intimidation. "Deal," he said. "Trust is a choice, Kimberly. I'm choosing to trust you. The question is whether you're brave enough to trust me back." She held his hand longer than necessary, feeling the calluses, the strength, the surprising gentleness in how his fingers curved around hers. "I jumped between you and someone I thought was helpless. Bravery isn't my problem." "No." His voice dropped to something almost reverent. "It's not." They stood there in the dim light, hands clasped, breathing synchronized, on the edge of something neither could name. The rain continued its percussion against the windows. David cleared his throat from across the room. A gentle reminder that they weren't alone, that this moment had witnesses and implications beyond the electricity arcing between them. Curtis released her hand slowly, reluctantly. "Go home. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow, we start uncovering the truth." Kimberly nodded, not trusting her voice. She moved toward the elevator, feeling his eyes track her every step. At the doors, she turned back. "Curtis? Yes? If you're lying to me about any of this, if Jasmine isn't alive, if Clark is clean, if this is some elaborate con, I will destroy you. Badge or no badge. I will burn your world to the ground." He smiled, and it was genuine, almost tender. "I would expect nothing less." The elevator doors closed, and Kimberly leaned against the mirrored wall, her heart hammering, her mind racing, her entire world rewritten in the span of 30 minutes. She had a new phone in her pocket, a new mission in her mind, and a dangerous alliance with a man who was either her salvation or her damnation. Tomorrow, she'd find out which. The dress arrived at noon in a box that probably cost more than Kimberly's monthly rent. Midnight blue silk that moved like water, deceptively simple at first glance, but revealing its quality in every seam, every drape. The note inside was written in the same precise hand as before. "Tonight you're not FBI, you're mine. Dress accordingly." See. She stared at it for a long time, fingers tracing the silk, before her phone, the encrypted one, buzzed with details. The Korean consulate's annual gala, black tie. Diplomatic immunity and criminal enterprise mixing like poison in expensive crystal. Her job was simple. Watch, listen, identify anyone who seemed too interested in Curtis or too comfortable in his presence. Simple. Right. Now she stood in the consulate's grand ballroom, feeling like a fraud in borrowed elegance. The space was magnificent. Soaring ceilings painted with traditional Korean motifs. Chandeliers that probably required their own insurance policy. Walls of windows overlooking the city's glittering skyline. The crowd was a study in power. Diplomats in formal hanbok, Chicago politicians in tuxedos, business magnates who operated in the gray spaces between legal and criminal. And everywhere, the suffocating scent of wealth, expensive perfume, aged whiskey, the particular musk of people who'd never known financial insecurity. Curtis appeared at her elbow like he'd been summoned by thought alone. In his tuxedo, he was devastating. Sharp lines and dangerous elegance, the serpent tattoo just visible above his collar like a warning sign. He offered his arm without a word, and she took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath expensive fabric. "Breathe," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. "You look like you're preparing for battle." "Aren't I?" "No." His hand covered hers on his arm, warm and steadying. "You're my date. Smile. Laugh at my jokes. Let me show you off to people who matter." They moved through the crowd like dancers who'd practiced this routine for years. Curtis introduced her as his companion. No name, no background, just a beautiful woman on his arm. The ambiguity was intentional, she realized. It made her simultaneously invisible and intriguing. David shadowed them from a distance, his gray eyes constantly scanning for threats. Occasionally, Curtis would pause to exchange words with someone. Korean phrases Kimberly didn't understand. English negotiations that sounded like business but felt like warfare. Each conversation was a chess move, and she was learning to read the board. "The man at 3 o'clock, Curtis said softly, guiding her toward the bar. "Korean consulate attaché. Been trying to get information on my shipping routes for 6 months. He'll approach us within 2 minutes. 90 seconds later, the attaché materialized with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The conversation was cordial, layered with subtext Kimberly could almost taste. Curtis deflected every probe with the skill of someone who'd been playing this game since childhood. When they moved away, Kimberly whispered, "Everyone here is performing. Welcome to my world." Curtis snagged 2 glasses of champagne from a passing server, handed her one. "The key is figuring out who's performing what role and why." That's when Kimberly saw her. Ruby Hartman moved through the crowd like a shark through water. Crimson dress that probably cost more than Kimberly's car, diamond earrings that caught the light with every movement, confidence that came from knowing she was the most dangerous person in any room. She was tall, elegant, with the kind of beauty that felt engineered rather than natural. Her eyes were calculating, constantly measuring, never still. "Who is she?" Kimberly asked, though something in her gut already knew the answer was important. Curtis's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ruby Hartman, shipping magnate, inherited her father's empire and tripled it in 5 years. She's been trying to buy into my operations for the past year. And you've been refusing. She's too clean, too legitimate on paper. Which means she's very good at hiding what she actually does." Curtis's voice dropped. David flagged her 6 months ago. Her shipping routes align with known trafficking corridors. Her finances don't quite add up, but she's protected. Consulate connections, political donations, enough legitimate business to muddy the waters. Ruby's eyes found Curtis across the room, and her smile sharpened. She started toward them with purpose. "Let me handle this," Curtis murmured. But Ruby wasn't looking at Curtis. Her gaze was fixed on Kimberly with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Curtis." Ruby's voice was honey over steel, her accent American with Korean undertones. "I didn't know you were seeing anyone. How delightful." "Ruby." Curtis's arm tightened around Kimberly's waist, possessive, protective. "This is private," Kimberly interrupted, extending her hand with a smile that matched Ruby's for sharpness. "A pleasure." Ruby's handshake was brief, her skin cool, her grip calculated to convey dominance. "Private. How mysterious. I do love mysteries." She turned to Curtis. "We should talk about the proposal I sent. Perhaps sometime this week?" "Perhaps." Non-committal. Polite refusal wrapped in diplomatic language. Ruby's smile never wavered, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, recalibration, threat assessment. She was reading them both, and Kimberly had the distinct impression they'd just failed some test. "Enjoy the evening," Ruby said, her gaze lingering on Kimberly for one beat too long before she glided away. "She made you." David's voice came through the small earpiece Curtis had given Kimberly earlier. Curtis guided Kimberly toward the balcony, away from listening ears. The night air was cold, crisp, carrying the scent of the city below. They stood at the railing, close enough to appear intimate to anyone watching from inside. Made me as what? Kimberly asked quietly. Not sure yet, but she recognized something. Maybe law enforcement training in your posture. Maybe she's seen your photo in someone's file. Curtis turned to face her, his back to the ballroom, blocking her from view. This just got more complicated. Should I leave? No. The word was immediate, absolute. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones in a gesture that looked possessive but felt protective. Stay close. If she thinks you're important to me, she'll try to use you. Better to have you where I can see you. Kimberly's breath caught. This close, she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the controlled strength in his hands, could smell cedar and something uniquely him beneath expensive cologne. The line between their cover and something real blurred dangerously. You're good at this, she whispered. At what? Making people believe you care. Something raw flashed across his face. What if I'm not making them believe anything? The moment stretched, tension coiling between them like a living thing. His gaze dropped to her lips, and she felt her own doing the same. The smart thing would be to step back, to remind them both this was business. The smart thing. Curtis's phone vibrated, then Kimberly's. Simultaneously, they pulled out their devices, and both screens showed the same message from an unknown number. Get out. It's a trap. David, Curtis said into his earpiece. Status. Movement at all exits. Federal vehicles approaching. This is a raid. Kimberly's blood went cold. Clark. Before Curtis could respond, the ballroom doors burst open. FBI tactical teams flooded in, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands in English and Korean. Guests screamed, dropped to the ground, chaos erupting like a bomb had detonated. Curtis grabbed Kimberly's wrist, pulling her toward the balcony's edge. But they were too late. 3 agents swarmed them, weapons trained, faces hidden behind tactical masks. Curtis Ji-sung Choi, you're under arrest for human trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy. On whose authority? Curtis's voice was ice. Special Agent Raymond Clark, FBI. Kimberly watched Curtis's hands be forced behind his back, watched him be shoved to his knees with a violence that made her flinch. She tried to move toward him, but rough hands grabbed her arms, yanked her in the opposite direction. This one's with us, a voice said. Familiar, cold. Clark emerged from the tactical team, his expression triumphant. He looked at Kimberly with something like pity. Agent Phillips. Looks like your cover was deeper than we thought. Good work getting this close to Choi. It was a script, a performance. And she was being forced to play a role she didn't understand. Sir, debrief later. Clark's grip on her arm was bruising. Right now we need to get you somewhere safe. Choi's people might retaliate. Kimberly looked back at Curtis. He was on his knees, surrounded by weapons, bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow. But his eyes found hers across the chaos, and in them she saw not fear but fury, and something that looked like betrayal. He thought she'd set him up. Curtis, she started, but Clark was already dragging her away, through the panicked crowd, past the tactical teams, toward the exit where federal vehicles waited with engines running. She was shoved into the back of an SUV, door slamming with a finality that sounded like a cell door closing. Through the tinted window, she watched the consulate disappear, watched her chance to explain evaporate like smoke. The encrypted phone in her clutch buzzed once. She pulled it out, reading the message that made her blood freeze. If you're not with us, you're against us. Choose carefully. V. The SUV pulled into traffic, and Kimberly realized she'd just been abducted by the very agency she'd sworn to serve. Clark sat in the front passenger seat, making calls in a voice too low to hear, his profile sharp as a blade. And somewhere back at the consulate, Curtis was being arrested for crimes Clark himself had committed, framed by evidence Clark had probably planted, destroyed by the very system meant to protect the innocent. Kimberly's hand closed around the phone. Whatever was about to happen, whatever Clark had planned for her, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She'd already made her choice. Now she just had to survive long enough to act on it. The interrogation room at the FBI field office was designed to break people. Cinder block walls painted institutional beige. Steel table bolted to concrete floor. Cameras in corners recording every breath, every flinch, every moment of weakness. Kimberly had sat on the other side of this table dozens of times, watching suspects crumble under the weight of their own guilt. Now she was the suspect. Clark hadn't spoken to her during the drive, hadn't acknowledged her questions, her demands to know what was happening, her assertion of her rights as a federal agent. He'd simply delivered her to this room, locked the door, and disappeared. That was 3 hours ago. The isolation was intentional, a psychological tactic she'd used herself. Leave them alone long enough, and they'd start imagining scenarios worse than reality. They'd break themselves before you even started asking questions. But Kimberly wasn't imagining scenarios. She was remembering. Martinez disappearing. Clark's too quick dismissal of her questions. The way he'd known the aunt was theater. The convenient timing of this raid. Curtis's words echoing in her mind. The man who's been using you to eliminate his competition. The door opened. Clark entered with 2 agents she didn't recognize. Hard faces, harder eyes. The kind of people who followed orders without asking questions. They positioned themselves by the door, while Clark sat across from her, a manila folder in his hands. Agent Phillips. His voice was measured, controlled. I need you to understand the severity of your situation. My situation? She kept her voice level despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. I'm a federal agent who was forcibly removed from a scene without explanation. I want to speak to my union rep and a lawyer. You were extracted from a compromised position. Clark opened the folder, spread photographs across the table. Each one showed her with Curtis. At the restaurant, entering the Riverside Club, standing too close on the consulate balcony. How long have you been working for Choi? The accusation landed like a physical blow. You can't be serious. We have you on surveillance meeting with him multiple times. We have financial transfers being investigated, large deposits that coincidentally appeared after your meetings. We have testimony that you compromised tonight's operation by warning him about the raid. Clark leaned forward, his expression almost sympathetic. I want to believe you were coerced, that he threatened you, or your sister. Give me something to work with. Kimberly. Help me help you. Sister. He'd played that card, and the casual cruelty of it made her want to lunge across the table. Instead, she forced herself to breathe, to think like the investigator she was. What deposits? She asked quietly. Offshore accounts, Cayman Islands, $50,000 over the past 2 weeks. Clark slid another document toward her. Bank statements with her name, her social security number, transactions she'd never made. Your password was used, your credentials. Either you're dirty or Choi's people are very good at framing you. It was beautiful, really. Elegant in its simplicity. Clark had just given her a choice. Admit to being dirty, or admit that Curtis had compromised her so thoroughly that she was useless as an agent. Either way, her credibility was destroyed. I want my lawyer, she repeated. You can have a lawyer, but first I need to know. Does Choi have Jasmine? Kimberly's blood went cold. Clark's expression was concerned, almost fatherly, but his eyes were calculating, measuring her reaction. What are you talking about? We have intelligence suggesting Choi's been using your sister as leverage, that he showed you proof of life in exchange for information about FBI operations. Clark's voice dropped, intimate as confession. I know how much you've searched for her. I know the pain you've been carrying. If he has her, if he's been dangling that hope in front of you, I understand why you'd compromise yourself. But you need to tell me the truth now, before this gets any worse. It was perfect. Clark had constructed a narrative that explained everything, that turned her justified suspicions into evidence of her corruption. If she denied it, she looked guilty. If she confirmed it, she'd be admitting to treason. But there was one thing Clark didn't know. She'd been recording everything since the moment she'd left the consulate. The encrypted phone in her bra. Small, undetectable, already uploading audio to a secure server Curtis's people controlled. Every word Clark said, every accusation, every careful construction of her guilt was being preserved. I don't know what you're talking about, she said carefully. I've had no contact with Choi outside of my undercover assignment. Whatever financial records you have are fabricated. And if you have intelligence about my sister, you're obligated to share it with me. Clark studied her for a long moment, then sat back with a sigh. I'd hoped you'd be reasonable. Hoped we could resolve this quietly. He nodded to the agents by the door. Take her to holding. No phone call, no visitors. She's a flight risk with potential foreign contacts. You can't hold me without charges. I can hold you for 48 hours as a material witness. After that, we'll see what charges seem appropriate. Clark stood, gathering his manufactured evidence. Think carefully about your next moves, Kimberly. Right now, you're looking at 20 years for corruption and treason. Cooperate, and maybe we can negotiate something more reasonable. He left, and the two agents hauled her out of the chair with unnecessary force. The hallway was deliberately chosen. They took her past the bullpen where her former colleagues watched with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. Past the photos of distinguished agents on the wall, past everything she'd worked for. The holding cell was cold, small, designed for temporary containment of suspects who needed to be broken before official processing. The door clanged shut, and Kimberly was alone with the sound of her own breathing and the certainty that Clark had just made his first mistake. He'd left her alive. Midnight came and went. Kimberly sat on the narrow bench, counting the patterns in the cinder blocks, keeping her mind sharp despite exhaustion. The encrypted phone was still secure, still recording, still uploading. David would have the audio by now, would know she hadn't betrayed them. The question was whether they'd come for her or cut their losses. At 2 a.m., the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in. Dim, red, barely enough to see. Somewhere in the building, an alarm started shrieking. Voices shouted in confusion. Footsteps pounded past her cell. Then silence. The cell door clicked open. David stood in the doorway, dressed in black tactical gear, a gun in one hand and her jacket in the other. His expression was its usual mask, but something in his eyes suggested approval. 30 seconds, he said. Move. Kimberly didn't waste time with questions. She followed him into the corridor where 3 guards lay unconscious. Not dead, she noted with relief, just efficiently neutralized. David moved like a ghost, leading her through passages that shouldn't have been accessible, past security systems that had mysteriously failed. They emerged in a parking garage where a nondescript van waited, engine running. David shoved her inside, climbed in after her, and the vehicle was moving before the door fully closed. Curtis sat in the back, his tuxedo jacket gone, his white shirt stained with blood from the cut above his eye. But his gaze was sharp, focused, assessing her for injuries. Are you hurt? His voice was rough, urgent. No? You? I've had worse. He pulled out a first aid kit, began cleaning the cut with steady hands. Clark made his move, now we make ours. How did you? The FBI doesn't just let prisoners escape. They do when their entire security system crashes simultaneously. David drove with one hand, typing rapidly on a laptop with the other. 20 minutes ago, every digital system in that building went dark. Cameras, locks, communications. By the time they restore everything, we'll be ghosts. Kimberly looked between them. You planned this. Before the gala, you knew Clark would try something. We suspected. Curtis finished bandaging his eyebrow, his movements precise despite the vehicle's motion. The raid was always a possibility. Having contingencies in place was simple prudence. Breaking into FBI headquarters is not simple prudence. Neither is leaving you in Clark's custody. Curtis's eyes met hers, and the intensity there stole her breath. You trusted me. I trust you. That means I don't leave you behind. The words settled into her chest, warm and solid. In her world, the world of badges and protocols and institutional loyalty, trust was something earned over years and tested through procedure. In Curtis's world, trust was a choice you made in the moment and defended with everything you had. He's framing me, she said quietly. Offshore accounts, false testimony, evidence of corruption. I know, we heard everything. David made a sharp turn, the city lights blurring past. The recording's already with our lawyers and a journalist who specializes in law enforcement corruption. By morning, Clark will have bigger problems than finding you. Where are we going? Curtis pulled out a tablet, showed her a map with several locations marked. Somewhere he can't reach. Somewhere we can regroup and plan our next move. He paused. Kimberly, once we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be a fugitive. Your career with the FBI is over. Everything you've worked for. is built on a lie." She cut him off, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "Clark used me, used my sister to manipulate me, used the institution I believed in as cover for atrocities. I'm done being his weapon." Curtis studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we finish this, together." The van pulled into an alley, and they transferred to a different vehicle. A luxury sedan that Curtis drove himself while David vanished into the night with the van. The route took them out of the city, into suburbs that gradually gave way to isolated estates. The safe house revealed itself slowly. A modern structure hidden behind old trees, all glass and steel and security that Curtis disarmed with biometric scans. Inside, it was spare but comfortable, designed for function over aesthetics. Traditional Korean elements mixed with contemporary technology, creating a space that was somehow both Curtis's and Nowhere's. "There's a bedroom upstairs," Curtis said, setting down a bag she hadn't seen him carrying. "Clothes, toiletries, everything you'll need. Get cleaned up. We'll debrief when you're ready." Kimberly nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. But as she moved toward the stairs, Curtis caught her wrist, not restraining, just holding. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not breaking. Clark had you for 3 hours. He could have made you doubt everything, could have turned you against us with the right pressure. But you held." His thumb brushed across her pulse point, and she knew he could feel her heart racing. "That kind of strength is rare. I'm not strong. I'm terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it." His grip loosened, but he didn't let go. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Kimberly Phillips. Don't ever forget that." He released her, but the warmth of his touch lingered as she climbed the stairs. The bathroom was ridiculous. Marble and chrome. A shower that could fit 4 people. Water pressure that felt like luxury. Kimberly stood under the spray for longer than necessary, washing away the stink of the holding cell, the residue of Clark's accusations, the weight of the choice she'd just made. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel that was probably worth more than her monthly rent, she found clothes laid out on the bed, not the silk dress from earlier. That was gone, probably destroyed as evidence. Instead, practical clothes, jeans that somehow fit perfectly, a soft sweater, undergarments still in packaging. Someone had anticipated this moment, planned for her comfort even in crisis. She dressed slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her mind too wired for sleep. Downstairs, she found Curtis in the kitchen, because apparently, even safe houses had gourmet kitchens. He'd changed into dark jeans and a Henley, his feet bare, his hair damp from his own shower. He looked younger like this, less the feared Mafia boss and more just a man making tea at 3 a.m. "Green tea or chamomile?" he asked without turning around. "How did you know I was here?" "I always know where you are." He poured 2 cups of green tea, handed her one. "It's part of keeping you safe." They moved to the living room where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked darkness and distance. Curtis sat on a low couch, and after a moment's hesitation, Kimberly sat beside him, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "Tell me about your brother," she said quietly. Curtis's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he exhaled slowly, the sound carrying years of grief. "Minjun. He was 7 when they took him. I was 15. Curtis stared into his tea like it held answers. "We were in Busan, visiting our aunt. I was supposed to be watching him at the market, but I got distracted. Some girl probably, something stupid in teenage. When I looked up, he was gone. They never found him? Found his body 3 months later. They'd trafficked him, used him, destroyed him. By the time the police recovered him, he'd been dead for weeks." Curtis's voice was flat, emotionless in the way of people who'd cried all their tears years ago. "I made a promise at his funeral. Every person I save, every operation I dismantle, every trafficker I destroy, it's for Minjun. It won't bring him back, but maybe it prevents someone else's brother from ending up in an unmarked grave." Kimberly's hand found his before she could think better of it. "I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry." Curtis's fingers intertwined with hers, holding tight. "Clark has been doing to dozens of families what was done to mine, and he's been using the badge, using the system meant to protect people, as his shield. That kind of evil needs to be destroyed, not arrested. We'll destroy it, together. Curtis turned to look at her, and something in his expression shifted, from grief to something rawer, more immediate. You scare me, you know that? I scare you? Terrify me. His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Because for 10 years I've known exactly who I am and what I'm capable of. I've been the monster that fights monsters, and that's been enough. But then you walked into my life with your impossible courage and your moral certainty, and suddenly I want to be more than that. I want to be the man you see when you look at me. Kimberly's breath caught. Curtis, I know this is complicated. I know we're in the middle of a war, and this is probably the worst possible timing, but I need you to know. He stopped, struggling for words in a way she'd never seen him struggle. This isn't manipulation. This isn't strategy. What I feel when I look at you. She kissed him, not gently, not carefully, but with all the fear and fury and desperate need that had been building since the moment she'd stepped between him and his aunt. His surprise lasted half a second before he responded, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. His hands were in her damp hair, at the small of her back, everywhere and not enough. She tasted tea and something darker, felt the controlled strength in his body giving way to something more primal. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. Kimberly, don't. Her fingers traced the serpent tattoo on his neck, felt his pulse hammering beneath the ink. Don't apologize, don't rationalize, just. A phone buzzed. Curtis's, with an urgency that couldn't be ignored. He pulled back, checking the screen, and his expression hardened. David, it's urgent. Reality crashed back. They weren't just two people discovering each other. They were fugitives, hunted by the FBI and Clark's network, racing against time to save innocent lives. Curtis answered, his voice returning to that controlled calm. Talk to me. Kimberly couldn't hear David's words, but she watched Curtis's face change, concern to shock to cold fury. When? A pause. How many? Another pause. We move now. Prep the team. He ended the call, stood with predatory purpose. Clark is moving his operation. Tonight. He knows we have the evidence, knows we're coming for him. He's evacuating his holding facilities and cleaning house. Jasmine is at the North Docks facility. David confirmed it 20 minutes ago. Curtis was already moving, pulling weapons from hidden compartments, checking loads with practiced efficiency. But Clark has 30 armed contractors and a timeline. If we don't get there before he finishes the evacuation, they'll disappear, Kimberly finished. All of them. Every victim, every piece of evidence, gone. We have 90 minutes, maybe less. Curtis handed her a tactical vest, a weapon she recognized as FBI issue. I won't lie to you, this is going to be ugly. Clark won't come quietly, and his people are professionals. The odds of us walking away from this don't matter. Kimberly checked the weapon, her training snapping into focus. My sister is in that building, and I'm not losing her again. Curtis's expression softened for just a moment. He cupped her face one more time, kissed her, brief, fierce, full of promise and goodbye. Then let's go to war. The encrypted phone buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number, but the message was clear. They're shipping tonight. North Docks. Come alone or bring an army. Either way, some of you won't leave alive. Clark. Kimberly stared at it, then looked at Curtis. He knows we're coming. Good. Curtis's smile was cold, dangerous, everything the world believed him to be. Let him prepare. Let him bring his contractors and his weapons and his false sense of security, because he's about to learn the difference between a criminal and a monster. And what's the difference? Criminals break laws. Monsters break the people who hurt innocents. He held out his hand. Ready? Kimberly took it, feeling the calluses, the strength, the certainty. Let's finish this. They walked out into the pre-dawn darkness, toward the city, toward violence, toward the moment where everything would either shatter or crystallize into something new. Behind them, the safe house's lights went dark. Ahead, the North Docks waited, full of secrets, suffering, and the reckoning that had been coming for years. The war was about to reach its breaking point. And this time, only one side would walk away. The safe house roof became their war room at dawn. Kimberly watched Curtis spread surveillance photos across weathered concrete, his fingers tracing routes and exits with the precision of someone who'd mapped 100 similar operations. The city sprawled below them, indifferent to their urgency. Lake Michigan, a dark mirror reflecting nothing. David arrived as the sun broke the horizon, carrying coffee that tasted like gasoline and files that changed everything. Most of Kimberly's bureau tech was borrowed, not returned. She still had access to encrypted comms and tactical gear that should have been turned in months ago, a small rebellion that now kept them alive. Ruby Hartman owns the shell company that leases the North Docks facility. David's voice was flat, factual. Her signature is on transfer documents dated 3 days before Martinez disappeared. She's not just connected to Clark, she's his infrastructure. Curtis studied the documents without visible reaction, but Kimberly saw his jaw tighten, saw the way his fingers went still on the photographs. How deep? Diplomatic credentials through the Korean consulate. Shipping manifests that match known trafficking corridors through Manila, Bangkok, Busan. Bank transfers that funnel through her legitimate operations into Clark's accounts. David pulled up a tablet, showed them a web of connections that made Kimberly's stomach turn. She's been building this for a decade. Clark is her Chicago franchise. Kimberly felt the weight of the gala differently now. Ruby's calculating gaze, her immediate recognition of something wrong, her casual mention of proposals. She knew I was FBI. Probably. Curtis stood, moved to the roof's edge where the city spread like a promise or a threat. Which means she also knows we're coming. The warehouse is either a trap or Clark's final desperate move. Either way, we're out of time. The wind pulled at his shirt, and Kimberly saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a weapon waiting to be deployed. She moved beside him, close enough that their arms brushed. "Tell me about Busan," she said quietly. Curtis's expression shifted, grief surfacing beneath the tactical mask. Minjun loved markets. The noise, the colors, the way vendors would sneak him sweets when they thought I wasn't looking. That day, we were buying fish for dinner, our aunt's favorite. He wandered toward the toy stalls. His voice cracked, barely perceptible. I was 17, cocky, distracted by a girl selling ribbons. When I looked back, he was gone. Just gone. Like he'd never existed. Kimberly's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. The police said he probably wandered off, that he'd turn up, but I knew. Curtis's grip tightened. I knew because I saw the white van, saw the man watching us earlier. I knew, and I did nothing. 3 months later, they found his body in a shipping container headed for Taiwan. Medical examiner said he'd been dead for weeks, used up and discarded like he was nothing. You were a child. I was his brother. Curtis turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression made her chest ache. I promised him I'd protect him. I failed. So now I protect everyone else. Every person I save. Every operation I dismantle. It's penance. It won't bring him back, but maybe it stops someone else from living my nightmare. Kimberly pulled him closer, her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Jasmine laughed at everything. Stupid jokes, bad movies, her own terrible cooking. The last time I saw her, she was dancing in our apartment, headphones on, completely off-key. I told her she looked ridiculous. Her voice broke. That was the last thing I said to my sister before she disappeared, that she looked ridiculous. Curtis's arms came around her, solid and warm. We're going to find her, whatever it takes, and if she's not the same person I remember, then we love who she is now. His lips pressed against her hair. Trauma changes us, but it doesn't erase us. She's still your sister. She's still worth saving. David cleared his throat from across the roof. Interpol contact just confirmed. They've been tracking Ruby for 2 years but couldn't build a case. If we expose her now, it creates diplomatic complications. Korean consulate could claim immunity, pull her out before charges stick. Then we don't expose her yet. Curtis's mind was already moving, calculating angles. We use her. Let Clark think she's still secure. When we hit the warehouse, we document everything. Her involvement, her signatures, her complicity. Build an airtight case that Interpol can't ignore and Korea can't shield. That means letting her walk away from the gala raid. For now. Curtis's expression was cold, certain. But not forever. She's built her empire on other people's suffering. That debt comes due. The morning stretched, plans solidifying into action. David coordinated with his team, 12 men, former intelligence and military, loyal to Curtis, not from fear, but from shared purpose. Weapons were checked, routes mapped, contingencies planned for every variable they could anticipate. As the sun climbed higher, Curtis pulled Kimberly aside, away from David's tactical preparations. They stood at the roof's edge, the city waking below them, completely unaware of the war being waged in its shadows. After tonight, everything changes. Curtis's voice was quiet, meant only for her. If we survive, if we rescue Jasmine and take down Clark, you'll have your life back. Your career, your reputation, your future. You won't need me anymore. Kimberly turned to face him, studying the man beneath the monster's reputation. Is that what you think? That I'm here out of necessity? I think you're here because I have resources you need. Because your sister's life depends on my connections and my willingness to operate outside the law. His jaw tightened. I don't want you to feel obligated. After tonight. She kissed him. Hard. Fierce. Pouring 3 days of fear and fury and desperate need into the connection of their mouths. His surprise lasted half a second before he responded, pulling her against him, his hands tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she kept her forehead pressed to his. I'm here because you're the only person who's told me the truth. Because you risk everything for people you don't know. Because when I look at you, I don't see a monster. I see someone who's been fighting alone for too long. Curtis's thumb traced her jaw, his touch reverent. I've spent 10 years believing I had to be feared to be effective. That the only way to fight evil was to become something darker. But you. His voice roughened. You make me want to be better. Not the monster that fights monsters. Just a man trying to do right. Then be that man. Tonight. Tomorrow. Every day after. She held his gaze. Be that man with me. His kiss was softer this time, full of promise and possibility. They stood together as the city woke, as David's team prepared for war, as the hours counted down to violence and revelation. The encrypted phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, but the coordinates were clear. The warehouse location, confirmed. And beneath it, a final taunt from Clark. Bring your monster. Let's see if he bleeds. Curtis read it, his expression shifting from tender to tactical in a heartbeat. He wants me angry. Wants me reckless. Then we give him the opposite. Kimberly's voice was steel. We go in cold, precise. We save every person we can, document every crime we find, and we walk out with everything we need to bury him. Curtis smiled, slow and dangerous. I really am falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with timing and impossibility and absolute truth. Kimberly felt them settle into her chest, warm and terrifying. Tell me again when we survive tonight. Deal. They descended from the roof, toward preparation and violence, toward the moment that would either shatter them or forge them into something unbreakable. The sun climbed higher, the city breathed, and somewhere in the North Docks, Jasmine waited, alive, changed, but still her sister, still worth the war they were about to wage. The North Docks smelled like diesel and decay, industrial rot mixed with Lake Michigan's cold promise. Kimberly crouched beside Curtis in the shadows of a rusted container, watching the warehouse through night vision optics that turned the world into shades of green and black. David's voice crackled through her earpiece, coordinates and countdowns, the steady rhythm of a man who'd done this 100 times. 12 hostiles on the perimeter. Another 20 inside, maybe more. Thermal imaging shows 47 heat signatures in the holding area. Clark is inside. Ruby Hartman left 30 minutes ago. Clean exit, diplomatic vehicle. Curtis's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. She gets hers later. Right now we focus on extraction and evidence. The team moved like ghosts. 3 units, synchronized, communication reduced to hand signals and breath. Kimberly followed Curtis, her FBI training merging with his operational precision, becoming something hybrid and deadly. The weight of her weapon was familiar, comforting, a tool to save rather than destroy. The entry was surgical. David's team neutralized the perimeter guards with tranquilizers, non-lethal but effective. They dragged unconscious bodies into shadows, cable-tied wrists, moved forward. The warehouse loomed, corrugated metal and broken windows, fluorescent light bleeding through cracks. Inside was worse. The holding area was a converted shipping container. 40 feet of human misery. Women, mostly. Some men, children. All with the hollow eyes of people who'd stopped hoping for rescue. The smell hit Kimberly first. Sweat, fear, waste. Her stomach turned, but her hands stayed steady. Curtis was already moving, bolt cutters freeing chains, his voice low and steady in Korean, English, Spanish. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." That's when Kimberly saw her. Jasmine stood at the container's far end, not chained like the others, but wearing a guard's uniform, a weapon at her hip. Her face was thinner, harder. For a heartbeat, Kimberly forgot the mission, forgot oxygen itself. The sister she'd imagined crying in the dark was standing tall in combat boots, eyes that no longer recognized her. Grief and awe tangled in her throat until they tasted the same, her eyes carrying scars that had nothing to do with visible wounds. She looked at Kimberly without recognition, without hope, with something that looked dangerously like hostility. "Jasmine," Kimberly's voice cracked. Her sister's hand went to her weapon. "Don't." The word was a knife. Curtis positioned himself between them, his voice calm but firm. "We're here to help. All of you. Including you, Jasmine." "You don't know what you're doing." Jasmine's voice was raw, unfamiliar. "Clark doesn't take losses. He'll kill everyone here before he lets you walk out with evidence. Then we move faster." Curtis gestured to David, who was already uploading files from a terminal. Manifests, ledgers, videos. Everything Clark had been hiding. 2 minutes. Get everyone mobile. The explosion came from the east wall. Not external, internal. Clark had rigged the warehouse, and someone had just triggered the sequence. Fire bloomed like a deadly flower, spreading across wooden pallets and chemical storage, smoke filling the space with choking speed. Chaos erupted. The rescued screamed, scattered, trampled toward exits that were suddenly blocked by flame. Curtis's team moved with practiced efficiency, forming human chains, guiding people toward the one clear exit. But the fire was faster, hungrier, consuming oxygen and hope with equal veracity. Kimberly grabbed Jasmine's arm. "We're leaving. Now." "I can't," Jasmine tried to pull away. "They have my file, my real name, everyone I ever knew. If I run, they'll..." "Then we take the files, but you're not dying here." Kimberly's grip tightened. "I didn't search for 3 years to lose you in a fucking fire." Something in Jasmine's expression cracked. She nodded once, sharp and military, then moved. No longer a guard, but a survivor choosing escape. The evacuation was controlled chaos. Curtis carried a child who couldn't walk, his shirt already singed from proximity to flames. David hauled hard drives and documentation, priorities clear even as the ceiling began to groan. The team formed a corridor through smoke and heat, shepherding 47 people toward life. Clark emerged from the smoke like a demon, weapon raised, his face a mask of rage and desperation. "You should have stayed dead, Curtis." Curtis didn't hesitate. He moved between Clark and the fleeing hostages, his own weapon steady. "It's over. The files are uploaded. Federal agents are 3 minutes out. You can die here, or you can surrender and face trial." "You think you're a hero?" Clark's laugh was unhinged. "You're a criminal, a murderer. The only difference between us is I had a badge." "No." Kimberly stepped forward, her weapon trained on her former handler. "The difference is he saves people. You destroy them. And I'm done letting you hide behind that badge." Clark's weapon swung toward her, time fragmented. Curtis moved with predatory speed, closing the distance, his shot precise and non-lethal. Clark's shoulder, forcing the weapon from his grip. Clark stumbled, fell, his blood mixing with smoke and ash. "Get him out," Curtis ordered 2 of his men. "Federal custody, alive." The warehouse groaned, ceiling supports failing. They had seconds, maybe less. Curtis grabbed Kimberly's hand, pulled her toward the exit where David waited, his expression urgent. They ran through collapsing corridors, through heat that blistered skin, through smoke that turned breath to agony. They emerged into cold night air, lungs burning, eyes streaming. Behind them, the warehouse collapsed in a symphony of breaking metal and roaring flame. Sirens wailed in the distance. Federal vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances. The rescued huddled in groups, wrapped in emergency blankets, alive against impossible odds. Kimberly found Jasmine sitting against a container, staring at the burning building with hollow eyes. She sat beside her sister, not touching, not speaking, just present. "I thought I'd never see you again," Jasmine finally said. "I never stopped looking. I'm not the same person. What they did." Her voice broke. "I don't know if I can be her again." Kimberly took her sister's hand, held tight. "Then we figure out who you are now. Together." Curtis approached, soot-stained and exhausted, but his eyes were clear. He nodded to Jasmine. Respect, not pity, then looked at Kimberly. "Federal agents are here. Clark is in custody. The files are secure. We won." But his expression said what they both knew. This was just one battle in a longer war. The FBI field office press room was designed for control. Carefully positioned cameras, branded backdrop, lighting that flattered whoever stood at the podium. Clark had planned this moment for weeks. His carefully crafted narrative ready to absolve him and bury Curtis permanently. He didn't expect the narrative to explode. Kimberly walked through the front entrance at exactly 9 a.m., flanked by Curtis and David, backed by 12 survivors willing to testify. Security tried to stop them, but Deputy Director Okafor, Clark's nominal superior, now suspicious after the warehouse evidence, had already issued clearance. Behind the double doors, Curtis paused. The hum of cameras seeped through the wood like static. For one impossible second, he almost turned away. Freedom was a single step in the opposite direction. Then he thought of Minjun's laugh, of Kimberly's hand pulling people from fire, and he pushed the door open. Clark stood at the podium, mid-speech about the successful operation, about dismantling Chicago's most dangerous trafficking network, about the death of Curtis G. Sung Choi resisting arrest. Then Curtis walked into the room, very much alive, very much bringing receipts. The silence was absolute. Camera shutters clicked like mechanical heartbeats. Clark's polished expression shattered, reformed, shattered again. A man watching his careful construction collapse in real time. "Agent Clark," Kimberly's voice carried across the room, steady and cold. "Or should I call you what you really are? A trafficker, a murderer, a man who spent 6 years using his badge to destroy innocent lives. Agent Phillips, you're clearly under duress. I'm under recording." She held up a tablet, pressed play. Clark's voice filled the room, extracted from the interrogation 3 days ago. Evidence of his framing her, his threats about Jasmine, his casual admission of controlling the evidence chain. "Every word you said is documented. Every lie is preserved." Clark tried to recover. "This is clearly doctored, a desperate criminal's attempt to." Curtis stepped forward, and the room's energy shifted. Predator entering prey's territory. 47 people rescued last night. 20 years of financial records uploaded to federal servers. Testimony from 3 of your own contractors who decided saving their souls was worth more than your money. His voice was silk over steel. "The only desperate criminal here is you." Deputy Director Okafor moved toward the podium, her expression carved from ice. "Agent Clark, you're hereby suspended pending investigation. Please surrender your weapon and credentials." "You're believing a gangster over a decorated federal agent?" Clark's voice cracked. "I've served this bureau for 20 years, and used it as cover for trafficking for at least 6. Okafor's voice was absolute. "Justice Department prosecutors are already filing charges. The evidence is overwhelming." Clark's gaze swept the room, landing on Kimberly with pure hatred. "You'll never see your sister again. I made sure of it. She's too broken, too compromised. Everything she is now, that's on you." Jasmine stepped into the room. Thin, haunted, but standing. "Wrong." Clark went pale. "I'm testifying. Against you. Against everyone in your network." Jasmine's voice was rough from smoke damage, but certain. "You took 3 years of my life. You can't have one more second." Federal agents moved in, cuffing Clark with precision that spoke of practice. He fought, briefly, a final display of the authority he'd wielded for so long. But authority without legitimacy is just a performance, and the performance was over. As they dragged him toward the exit, Clark looked back at Curtis. "You think you've won? Ruby Hartman owns half of Chicago's infrastructure. Korean consulate protection, legitimate business fronts, connections you can't touch. She'll rebuild everything I built. Not if Interpol gets her first." David's voice was flat, factual. "Her diplomatic immunity doesn't extend to international trafficking charges, and we have her signature on every document." Clark's expression shifted from defiance to despair. They hauled him through the door, and the press room erupted, the noise blurred. Reporters shouting, flashes bursting like tiny explosions. But Kimberly heard none of it. Her pulse was thunder. Justice wasn't triumphant. It was hollow and shaking, like a bell after it struck. The sound of a narrative being rewritten in real time. Kimberly found Curtis at the room's edge, watching the chaos with something like satisfaction. She moved beside him, their shoulders touching. "How does it feel?" she asked quietly. "Like the beginning, not the end." Curtis's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Ruby's still out there. The network has other nodes. This war doesn't end with one arrest. Then we keep fighting." Kimberly looked at her sister, who was being surrounded by victim advocates and FBI counselors, already beginning the long road toward healing. "But maybe we can breathe for a minute first." Curtis pulled her close, right there in front of cameras and colleagues and witnesses. His kiss was brief but certain, a promise made public, a declaration that they were done hiding. When they broke apart, Okafor was watching with an expression that mixed disapproval with grudging respect. "Agent Phillips. My office. 1 hour." "Yes, ma'am." Okafor's gaze shifted to Curtis. "And you? Don't leave the city. Federal prosecutors will want your testimony, officially." Curtis nodded once, and Okafor left, already on her phone, already managing the fallout. The press room slowly emptied. Kimberly stood with Curtis, David, and Jasmine, 4 people bound by violence and revelation, by choices made in smoke and flame. "What now?" Jasmine asked, her voice small. "Now we rebuild." Curtis's voice was gentler than Kimberly had ever heard it. "We find you a safe place. Get you therapy, support, whatever you need. No rush, no pressure. Just time to heal." Jasmine looked at him with something like wonder. "Why do you care? I was part of his operation. I wore the uniform. You survived." Kimberly took her sister's hands. "That's all that matters. Everything else we figure out together." They walked out of the field office into morning light, toward uncertainty and possibility, toward a future that was theirs to write. Behind them, the machinery of justice began its slow grind. Indictments, trials, revelations. Ahead, the city sprawled, indifferent and full of promise. The war wasn't over, but for this moment, they'd won. 3 months transformed Chicago's landscape in ways both visible and hidden. Clark's trial dominated headlines, each revelation worse than the last. 23 victims testified. 17 contractors cooperated. Financial records exposed a network spanning 12 countries. Ruby Hartman was arrested attempting to board a diplomatic flight to Seoul, her immunity revoked after Interpol presented evidence too damning for even the consulate to ignore. Seoul withdrew her protection within hours of the evidence going public, a quiet political gesture that left Ruby exposed to every charge waiting to bury her. The North Docks warehouse was razed, the ground blessed by 3 different religious leaders, then donated for a community center. David transitioned to legitimate security consulting, his NIS training repurposed for protecting the vulnerable rather than eliminating threats. He'd finally traded covert shadows for daylight, turning his precision into protection instead of pursuit. It suited him more than he'd admit. He smiled more now, which was to say he smiled occasionally, which was progress. Jasmine moved slowly toward healing. Therapy 3 times weekly, a quiet apartment in Pilsen near Kimberly's new place, part-time work at a nonprofit supporting trafficking survivors. Her therapist warned she was moving too fast, but Jasmine said silence had taken enough already. Speaking, even when it hurt, was how she reclaimed herself. Some days were harder than others. Panic attacks, nightmares, moments where the past consumed the present. But she was rebuilding, one careful brick at a time. Kimberly returned to the FBI, but differently. No more undercover work. No more compromised handlers. She joined the Crimes Against Children unit, using her experience to dismantle networks before they destroyed lives. Deputy Director Okafor watched her carefully, measuring her loyalty, eventually concluding that sometimes the best agents were the ones who'd seen the institution's failures and chose to fix them anyway. Curtis's transformation was more public. Federal prosecutors offered a deal: full cooperation, complete transparency, divestment from anything remotely illegal, and permanent monitoring. Transparency was his protection. The more visible he became, restaurants, interviews, foundations, the harder it was for anyone to make him disappear quietly again. He took it, not because he feared prison, but because Kimberly had shown him a different way to fight. The restaurant was his first act of restitution. Elysée remained, but transformed. The fine dining facade gave way to something more honest. Korean-American fusion, affordable prices, staff hired from communities Clark had targeted. The private dining room where this story began became a community space, free for support groups and healing circles. Curtis cooked sometimes, which surprised everyone, including himself. He was good at it. Precise, methodical, capable of creating beauty from raw ingredients. Tonight, he was cooking for an audience of one. Kimberly arrived at 9, after a 16-hour shift that had ended with 4 arrests and 2 children returned to safe homes. She was exhausted, her mind still carrying the weight of other people's trauma. But when she walked into the restaurant's quiet kitchen and saw Curtis at the stove, jeans and a Henley, his serpent tattoo visible above the collar, something in her chest unclenched. "You look terrible," he said without turning around. Flatterer. She dropped her bag, moved to the counter where he'd poured wine she wouldn't drink and set out water she would. "What's for dinner?" "Kimchi jjigae, comfort food. My aunt's recipe." He stirred the pot and the scent was rich, earthy, full of memory and promise. "Figured you could use it." She could. Kimberly watched him work, noticing the ease in his movements, the absence of the coiled tension that used to define him. He still carried violence in his capable hands, still moved like a weapon when necessary. But here, now, he was just a man making stew for someone he loved. "How's Jasmine?" he asked. Scared, angry, healing. Kimberly accepted the bowl he handed her, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. She started a blog this week, writing about her experience, unfiltered, raw. It's terrifying and brave and so completely her. Curtis smiled, genuine and soft. "She's your sister. Brave runs in the family." They ate in comfortable silence, the restaurant empty except for them, the city's noise distant and unimportant. When they finished, Curtis took her hand, led her to the private dining room where this had all started. The space was different now. Brighter, softer, no longer designed to intimidate. He'd hung photographs on the walls, survivors they'd saved, new beginnings documented in smiles and mundane moments. In the center, a low table held a single white rose in a simple vase. "I've been thinking," Curtis said, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm, "about what comes next. We've talked about the foundation, the expansion plans. Not that." He pulled her closer, his free hand cupping her face. "About us, about whether this," he gestured between them. "Whether this is just survival bonding or something more." Kimberly's heart hammered. "And what did you decide?" "That I'm terrified." The confession was raw, honest. "I've spent a decade being feared, being the monster that fights monsters. I don't know how to be just Curtis. I don't know if I'm capable of being the man you deserve. Good thing I don't want the man I deserve." She pulled him closer, her forehead against his. "I want you. Complicated, dangerous, trying to be better. All of it." His kiss was slow, thorough, full of things words couldn't capture. When they broke apart, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small box. "This isn't a proposal. Not yet." He opened it, revealing a simple silver band. No diamonds, no ostentation. "This is a promise, that I choose you, every day, in every way, that I'll keep fighting to be worthy of your trust." Kimberly took the ring, slid it onto her right hand. Partnership, not possession. And I promise that I see you. Not the reputation, not the past, just you. And that's enough. They stood together in the space where violence had become courage, where fear had transformed into possibility. The city breathed around them, full of people who would never know their names, never understand the war that had been waged for their safety. That was fine. Heroes didn't need recognition. They just needed each other. 6 months later, the Foundation for Survivors and Foster Youth opened its doors. The inaugural event was held at Curtis's restaurant, which had been renamed simply Haven, a promise rather than pretense. Survivors mixed with supporters, corporate donors with former street kids, creating a community built on second chances and hard-won hope. Kimberly stood beside Curtis, watching Jasmine speak to a small group about her experience, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. David hovered nearby, protective but not intrusive. Deputy Director Okafor made a rare appearance, writing a substantial check and offering grudging approval. "We did it," Kimberly whispered. "We started it." Curtis's arm came around her waist, solid and sure. "The real work is the next decade, the next 100 survivors, the next 1,000 chances to get it right. Then we better get to work." For the first time in years, quiet didn't feel like a warning. Kimberly realized she was standing in peace, and her body didn't know what to do with it. Maybe that's what healing really was, learning how to breathe without expecting gunfire. He turned her to face him, right there in front of everyone. Colleagues and survivors, past and future. "Marry me." Not a question. Not exactly. More a recognition of inevitability. Yes. No hesitation, no calculation, just certainty. They kissed amid applause and laughter, two people who'd found each other in smoke and flame, who'd chosen each other despite impossible odds. The Foundation thrived. Jasmine healed. David smiled more. Clark rotted in prison. Ruby Hartman faced trial in 3 countries. The city moved forward, fractionally safer, incrementally better. And in a small restaurant in Chicago, a former monster and a former agent built something neither had thought possible. A life defined not by violence, but by the fierce, stubborn hope that people could change, that systems could be fixed, that love could grow in soil fertilized by trauma and watered with tears. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And somewhere in the city that never quite slept, a waitress who once defied a king finally believed in mornings. Thank you for watching. If Kimberly's courage stirred something in you, if Curtis's transformation felt true, share this story. Tell someone that second chances are built on honest work, that monsters can choose to be human, that the people who've seen the worst darkness often bring the brightest light. Leave a review. Share with someone who needs to hear that healing is possible, that justice can be won, that love is worth fighting for even when the odds feel impossible. There are more stories ahead, more fearless souls, more battles worth waging. Come back. We're just getting started.